I was 27 when I discovered the man I trusted for 3 years had been calling me the most unbearable woman alive behind my back. I wasn't supposed to see his phone that afternoon. He'd left it on the kitchen counter while he showered, and it kept buzzing. Normally, I wouldn't look. I'm not that person. But the preview on the screen caught my eye. It was a message from someone named Jim Babe, and the words made my stomach drop. "You're such a saint for putting up with her." I would have left ages ago. My hands were shaking as I unlocked his phone. I knew his passcode. He'd given it to me himself months ago, back when things were still good between us. What I found in those messages wasn't just betrayal. It was cruelty wrapped in mockery, shared with strangers who thought they knew me. I almost gag when she tries to kiss me. I read that line 3 times before it sank in. There were others, too. Screenshots he'd sent to multiple women, all of them laughing at my expense. He called me hideous, called me repulsive, said I was something he was just tolerating until he found someone better. And the worst part? While he was writing these things, I was cooking his favorite meals, doing his laundry, and desperately trying to prove I wasn't the cheater he kept accusing me of being. The bathroom door opened, and I heard him humming to himself. I didn't move, just stood there, holding his phone, staring at words I'd never be able to unsee. When Jake walked into the kitchen, towel around his waist, his smile vanished the second he saw my face. "What are you doing with my phone?" I didn't answer, just turned the screen toward him so he could see exactly what I was looking at. The color drained from his face so fast, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That's when Teresa walked out from the hallway behind me. I'd called her the moment I started reading, and she'd let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago. She'd been my best friend since high school, practically a sister, and the look on her face told me she was ready to burn the whole world down for me. "We need to talk," she said, her voice ice cold. "All 3 of us." Jake and I had been together for 3 years. The first 2 were decent. He was charming when he wanted to be, attentive in public, the kind of guy who'd hold doors and remember anniversaries. But somewhere around year 2, things shifted. He became possessive, jealous, started checking my phone, questioning where I was, who I was with. Male coworkers couldn't text me about work without him spiraling into accusations. He'd make jokes at dinners with friends about me being unfaithful, then tell me I was overreacting when I got upset. The pattern was always the same. Accuse me of something, watch me defend myself, then tell me that guilty people get defensive. I never cheated, not even close. I was completely faithful while he was out there projecting his own behavior onto me like some kind of twisted confession. Teresa had suspected something was off for weeks. She'd noticed how Jake would get weird when I mentioned working late, how he'd grill me about the smallest details of my day. But what really tipped her off was pure chance. A friend of hers matched with him on a dating app, recognized him immediately from photos on my social media. His profile said he was single and looking for fun. Teresa didn't tell me right away. She wanted to be sure it wasn't some kind of misunderstanding, so she'd been quietly gathering evidence, creating fake profiles, watching his activity, building a case. That night, after she showed me his dating profile, still active just hours earlier, we sat on my couch and she told me everything. Her friend had matched with him. Teresa had been tracking his messages for 2 weeks. She'd seen the lies, the manipulation, the carefully constructed double life. "I wanted to make sure before I showed you," she said quietly, her hand on mine. "I didn't want to hurt you unless I was absolutely certain." That's when we started planning, not just to expose him. Anyone could do that. We wanted something more precise, something that would make him understand exactly what he'd done, not through words, but through consequence. Teresa created a fake profile that night, using photos of a woman who looked nothing like me. She matched with him within hours, and he didn't hesitate for a second. Started messaging immediately, flirting, lying about his relationship status, complaining about his psycho ex, me, who he was trying to leave but couldn't quite shake. When Teresa asked why he didn't just end things, he wrote back without hesitation. She pays half the rent and does all the cooking and cleaning. Why give that up until I find something better? I read those words on Teresa's phone, sitting in my own living room, and something inside me went quiet and cold. Over the next few days, the messages got worse. He wasn't just talking to Teresa's fake profile. He was chatting with multiple women, sending them screenshots of conversations where they'd all mock me together, commenting on my appearance, my personality, making me the punchline of jokes I'd never hear. One thread haunted me more than the others. Some woman had written, "You're such a saint for putting up with her. I would have left ages ago," and Jake had responded, "It's complicated, but not for long. I promise." All while I was home, trying to be the perfect girlfriend, apologizing for things I didn't do, wondering what was wrong with me that he couldn't love me the way he used to. I didn't confront him right away. Teresa and I both knew that wouldn't be enough. He'd just lie, manipulate, turn it around on me somehow. We needed something bigger, not revenge exactly, but justice. The kind that leaves a mark. For the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly, smiled when he kissed me goodbye in the mornings, cooked his favorite dinners, laughed at his jokes, even apologized when he accused me of flirting with the delivery driver who literally just handed me our food and left. The whole time I was planning, I started noticing things I'd missed before, how he'd come home late smelling like unfamiliar perfume, how he'd get defensive when I casually asked about his day. Once, he even slipped and called me by another name when he was half asleep, caught himself immediately, and played it off like I'd misheard. I went through our finances with a fine-tooth comb. We had a joint account for shared expenses, but Jake also kept his own savings, something he was always bragging about, how disciplined he was, how he was building our future. I pulled up the statements for that account and felt my blood run cold. Large withdrawals on nights he claimed he was working late, charges at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel rooms, gift shops. He wasn't just cheating emotionally, he was funding an entire separate life. That's when I knew exactly where to hit him. Not just his ego, his wallet. I called my cousin Vicky. We'd always been close, and she owed me a favor after I'd helped her through a brutal breakup the year before. Everyone always said we looked similar, same dark hair, same build, except she was taller, more polished. The kind of woman who turned heads without trying. I told her everything over coffee, and by the end of our conversation, she wasn't just angry on my behalf, she was ready to help. "What Jake's doing isn't just cheating," she said carefully. "It's emotional abuse. You know that, right?" I did know. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet. Teresa showed Vicky all the evidence she'd been collecting, and the three of us spent an entire afternoon mapping out a plan. Not something loud or dramatic, something surgical, something that would make Jake destroy himself while thinking he was winning. By the time we finished, I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was clear, focused, ready. That night, I watched Jake texting on his phone with that stupid little smirk on his face, probably telling some other woman how unbearable I was, while simultaneously accusing me of texting someone inappropriate. And I made my decision. I had a plan now, and it was going to cost him everything. The next phase started at Jake's gym. He went religiously every Tuesday and Thursday, always posted workout selfies with timestamps like clockwork. We studied his routine for a week, figured out his patterns, and positioned Vicky perfectly. She got a guest pass through a friend and showed up on a Thursday morning wearing workout clothes that made even me do a double take. Within 10 minutes of her arrival, Jake hadn't stopped staring. The setup was almost too easy. He accidentally bumped into her near the weight racks, struck up a conversation about protein supplements or some other nonsense, and asked for her number to share workout tips. By that evening, he was texting her. I sat on my couch reading every message with Vicky beside me, Teresa on the other side with wine and takeout. My stomach was in knots, but we kept going. The texts were exactly what you'd expect. Compliments about how fit she looked, questions about whether she was single, suggestions they grab a smoothie sometime. Jake had no idea Vicky was my cousin. We looked similar if you paid attention, but he never really paid attention to me anymore. Not in any way that mattered. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Vicky would date him, get him completely hooked, make him spend ridiculous amounts of money trying to impress her, and then we'd reveal everything. Meanwhile, I'd keep playing the unsuspecting girlfriend, watching him dig his own grave one expensive dinner at a time. Their first date happened 3 days later. Jake told me he had a work event and kissed me goodbye like it meant something. I waited exactly 5 minutes after he left, then drove to Teresa's apartment where we tracked the entire evening through Vicky's updates. He took her to this upscale restaurant downtown, a place he'd always said we couldn't afford when I'd mentioned wanting to go there for our anniversary. Ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, bragged about his job, his savings account, his future, told her he was practically single and just wrapping up a dead-end situation. When Vicky sent us a bathroom selfie from the restaurant, I thought I might be sick. It was surreal seeing my boyfriend on a date with my cousin while I sat on a couch eating popcorn and pretending this was all part of some master plan and not just my life falling apart in slow motion. But Teresa kept reminding me, this was evidence, proof of exactly who Jake was when he thought no one was watching. Over the next few weeks, Jake became obsessed, started canceling plans with me to see Vicky, came home later and later with this smug look on his face like he had some incredible secret. And technically he did, just not the one he thought. The money spending started small, dinners, small gifts, concert tickets, but Vicky knew how to play it. She'd casually mention jewelry she liked while walking past a store window, and suddenly Jake was dropping $500 on earrings. She'd talk about a weekend spot she'd always wanted to visit, and he'd start booking hotels. The best part? Vicky would accidentally leave these gifts at his place, claiming she didn't want to lose them. Then she'd bring them straight to me. I started accumulating quite the collection. Expensive jewelry, designer bags, even a watch. All purchased with money he claimed he was saving for our future. We built what we called our revenge fund. Cash from gifts Vicky convinced him to buy her, money she'd claimed to need for emergencies that never actually happened. Sometimes I'd use it on myself, but mostly we split it 3 ways, saving it for something bigger. One weekend, Jake told me he had a business conference 2 hours away. What he actually had was a romantic getaway with Vicky at a luxury resort. She somehow convinced him she needed $800 in spending money for spa treatments. He handed it over without question. That money funded my spa day with Teresa while he was gone. We got everything, massages, facials, the works, all on Jake's dime. We even posted pictures, knowing Jake never looked at my social media anymore anyway. His lies got bolder. Working late 4 nights a week, business trips every weekend. Once he claimed his mom was sick so he could take Vicky to wine country. Then his mom called me that same day, asking if we wanted to come over for dinner. The whole time I kept playing my role, cooking meals, doing laundry, smiling when he kissed me with the same mouth he'd been using on my cousin. It was exhausting, maintaining the facade, but every time I wanted to break, I'd remember those messages. The most unbearable woman alive. I almost gag when she tries to kiss me. That kept me going. Things got complicated when Jake started opening up to Vicky about his horrible girlfriend. She'd record their conversations, legal in our state with one-party consent, and send them to me. Hearing him call me desperate, clingy, totally oblivious made me want to set his entire life on fire. The worst recording came one night when he told Vicky he couldn't wait to be done with the dead weight, and that the only reason he hadn't broken up with me yet was because it was convenient having someone split the bills and handle the household work. He literally called me his Roomba that also pays rent. When I heard that, I threw a glass against the wall. Teresa had to come over and help me clean it up before Jake got home. But even through the pain, our plan kept working. Vicky convinced Jake to buy her a new phone because hers kept dying. Immediately gave it to me since my screen was cracked. Designer shoes in her size that were actually mine. A weekend yoga retreat she never attended, but Teresa and I did, laughing the entire time about how Jake was funding our relaxation. Around month 2, Vicky started phase 2. She began talking about stress at work, about needing a real vacation, strategically mentioning places she'd always wanted to visit, places I had mentioned wanting to go. One night, she broke down in fake tears about never being able to afford a real getaway. Jake, playing the hero, immediately offered to help. Within hours, he'd booked a weekend at an expensive mountain resort, all expenses paid, all non-refundable. The day before they were supposed to leave, Vicky called him sobbing. Her grandmother was in the hospital and she couldn't possibly go. Jake was devastated, especially about losing the money. But Vicky, being thoughtful, suggested he take the trip anyway since he'd been working so hard. The minute Jake told me he was going on a fishing trip with the guys, I texted Teresa and Vicky. The plan was in motion. Vicky had already given me the reservation details. As soon as Jake left for work the next morning, Teresa and I packed bags and drove to the exact resort he'd booked. We checked in using his reservation, the front desk didn't even blink, and spent the entire weekend in luxury on his dime. Spa treatments, gourmet meals, private hiking guide. We even charged room service to his account. Meanwhile, Jake was texting Vicky about his imaginary fishing trip with imaginary friends. When I got home Sunday night, Jake was already there telling me about the huge fish he'd caught. I nodded and asked questions while secretly replaying the memory of soaking in a hot tub with champagne he'd paid for. The pattern continued for another month. My favorite scheme was the birthday present con. Vicky mentioned her best friend's birthday was coming up, and she wanted to get something special, but was short on cash. Jake immediately bought an expensive designer bag that Vicky promptly gave to me for my actual birthday the following week. I carried that bag everywhere, including on dates with Jake. He complimented it once, saying it looked expensive. I smiled and said Teresa got it for me. Technically, not a lie. His savings account was hemorrhaging money, and he started complaining about unexpected expenses, suggesting we tighten our belts. The audacity was almost impressive. Then things got worse, or better, depending on your perspective. I discovered Jake had been moving money from our joint account into his private one to fund his double life. Money that was supposed to be for bills, for our future. He'd been stealing from me to romance my cousin. Finding those transfers felt like being punched in the stomach all over again. But it also made me more determined than ever to see this through. As month 3 closed, Jake was planning an extravagant tropical vacation, draining every resource he had for deposits and new luggage and ridiculous resort wear. He had no idea what was coming, no idea that the control he thought he had was an illusion we'd carefully constructed. And soon, very soon, he was going to learn exactly how thoroughly he'd been played. Month 4 was when Jake started getting sloppy. He'd forget to text when he'd be late, leave receipts in pockets I'd find doing laundry. Once he even called me by Vicky's name when he was half asleep. I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Meanwhile, our revenge fund had grown to almost $4,000 in cash. Teresa and I took turns with the spa packages and restaurant certificates Vicky extracted from him. We were living well on his desperation to impress another woman. Then came the night that almost broke me. Jake sat me down for a serious talk about finances. Apparently, he was experiencing temporary cash flow issues and needed me to cover more expenses. Could I pay full rent next month instead of just my half? Maybe handle utilities too? He promised he'd pay me back once his work bonus came through. This man was spending thousands on my cousin while asking me to cover his basic living expenses. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded sympathetically and agreed to help. What choice did his oblivious girlfriend have? The second he left the room, I texted the group, "Phase escalation starts now." The next day, Vicky called Jake in tears. Her car had broken down and she needed $600 for repairs immediately. Jake, despite having just told me he was broke, somehow found the money within hours. Vicky took the cash, thanked him profusely, split it with us, and parked her perfectly functional car at my apartment complex. But the real gold mine was the tropical vacation. Vicky had convinced Jake to book Bora Bora, ridiculously expensive, completely non-refundable. I watched from the shadows as Jake started selling his prized possessions to fund it. Vintage guitar collection sold on eBay, his grandfather's watch pawned, crypto investments liquidated at a loss, all while telling me we needed to cut back on luxuries like my morning coffee and our Netflix subscription. One night while he was showering, I checked his phone and saw he'd taken out a personal loan for $15,000, going into debt for a woman he'd known 4 months while telling his girlfriend of 3 years we needed to economize. I was quietly preparing my exit, found a new apartment with Teresa's help, started moving important documents and belongings little by little, redirected my mail, opened a new bank account at a different institution. The stress of maintaining the facade was destroying me. Some nights I'd lie awake next to him, fighting the urge to scream about what a pathetic, disloyal piece of garbage he was. Teresa noticed I was struggling and suggested a mental health day using some of our fund money. We booked a day at Hot Springs, an hour outside the city. Ironically, a place Jake had once promised to take me for our anniversary, but claimed we couldn't afford. Soaking in mineral pools, getting massages, drinking champagne at 11 a.m., all while knowing Jake was at work stressed about money, completely unaware he was funding my relaxation. It felt like poetic justice. When I got home that evening, Jake was already there. Unusual. He looked nervous, pacing the living room, and my heart dropped. Had he somehow found out? But no, it was something else entirely. He sat me down and said he'd been thinking seriously about our relationship. This was it, I thought. He's finally going to break up with me. I prepared my fake surprise face, mentally rehearsing my call to Teresa and Vicky. Instead, this delusional man got down on one knee and pulled out a ring box, an engagement ring. He started saying he'd been distant because he was working through personal issues, but had realized I was the one he wanted to spend his life with. That sometimes people don't appreciate what they have until they almost lose it. That he wanted us to start fresh. I stood there speechless. This was his plan. Lock me down with an engagement while continuing to see Vicky on the side. Or maybe he was planning to break things off with her. Either way, it was the most pathetic, desperate move I could imagine. The ring was tiny. Nothing like what he'd once promised. His finances were clearly in worse shape than I'd thought. I had options. If I said yes, I'd buy more time to extract maximum revenge. If I said no, the game would be over too soon. So I did what any self-respecting woman would do in my position. I burst into tears, not entirely fake. They were tears of rage, and told him I needed time to think. That his distant behavior had hurt me deeply, and I wasn't sure we could fix things. That I loved him, a lie, but needed space. Jake was crushed, but tried to hide it. Said he understood, that he'd give me time. Even suggested I go stay with my parents for a few days to clear my head. I almost laughed. He was trying to get me out so he could have Vicky over. I pretended to agree, packed a bag, and went straight to Teresa's. Called Vicky immediately. We couldn't believe it. What kind of psychopath proposes to one woman while actively planning a luxury vacation with another? We decided to use this to our advantage. Vicky would be extra demanding, really pushing Jake's financial limits. Meanwhile, I'd string him along about the proposal, asking for time while actually finalizing my escape. I stayed at Teresa's for over a week, maintaining daily contact with Jake. Texts like, still thinking, and need more time, while he responded with increasingly desperate messages about how much he loved me and how he'd do anything to make it work. 10 days after the proposal, Jake called. He needed to talk in person. Something important. My heart raced. Had he figured out our scheme? I agreed to meet at a coffee shop, then immediately called an emergency strategy session. We prepared cover stories, just in case. Teresa even gave me a tiny microphone from her journalism days so they could listen from her car parked nearby. What Jake wanted to talk about wasn't our scheme. It was money. He confessed he'd made bad financial decisions and was in serious trouble. Maxed out credit cards, loans, borrowed money from friends. He needed my help to get back on track. Specifically, he wanted me to take out a loan in my name to consolidate his debts. He promised he'd pay it back, that it would be temporary, even suggested it could be the first step in proving we were a team who helped each other through tough times. I sat there stunned. This man had spent thousands on another woman, lied to my face for months, and now wanted me to go into debt to solve problems he'd created trying to impress my cousin. It took everything in me not to throw hot coffee in his face. Instead, I told him I needed to think about it, that it was a big decision, that I was still processing his proposal, and this added a whole new complication. I could see the desperation in his eyes as I left, promising to let him know soon. The minute I got back to Teresa's car, we burst out laughing. The sheer nerve was almost impressive. Vicky immediately started the next phase. She'd tell Jake she got an unexpected work bonus and could now contribute to their vacation. All he needed to do was complete the bookings, and she'd reimburse him for her share. That reimbursement would never come, of course, but Jake didn't know that. Over the next few days, Jake secured the final bookings for Bora Bora. He'd borrowed money from his brother to cover the last few thousand, but it was done. All non-refundable. All booked under both their names. The vacation was scheduled to start in exactly 2 weeks. Departure Friday morning, which meant we had 12 days to execute the final phase of our plan, and Jake had absolutely no idea what was coming. Those final 12 days were the most stressful of my life. Everything was planned down to the minute, but there was always the risk he'd figure something out, or Vicky would slip up somehow. Jake kept texting me about the loan, saying things like, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, and this is about our future together. The audacity of thinking I'd go into debt for him while he planned a luxury vacation with another woman. I finally agreed to meet him for dinner to discuss our relationship and the loan. I chose the mid-range restaurant where we'd had our first date, partly for symbolism, partly because I knew he couldn't afford anything fancier. I spent extra time getting ready. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, wearing the red dress he'd always loved. When I showed up, his face lit up with hope. We ordered food and made awkward small talk while he kept glancing at my left hand, noticing I wasn't wearing the engagement ring. Finally, I cut to the chase, told him I'd been thinking about our relationship, about the future, about what I really wanted to do. His face got serious and expectant. Then I dropped the first bomb. I told him I looked into the loan and could probably get approved for $25,000. The relief on his face was instant. He reached for my hand across the table, squeezing it, saying how much this meant to him, how he'd definitely pay me back, how this proved we were meant to be together. I smiled and said there was one condition. I needed access to all his financial records before taking out the loan. Bank statements, credit card bills, everything, just so I could understand exactly what I was getting into. His face froze. I kept my expression innocent, like this was perfectly reasonable. He stammered something about how that wasn't necessary, that he'd handle all the repayments, that I shouldn't worry. I insisted, said it was non-negotiable, that if we were building a life together, there needed to be complete transparency. Jake looked like he was going to be sick, excused himself to the bathroom, taking his phone. When he returned, he'd composed himself, agreed to show me his records soon, but said right now the urgent thing was processing the application because he had deadlines. I nodded sympathetically and told him I'd go to the bank Monday, it was Friday evening, to start the process. His relief was palpable. Little did he know I had zero intention of getting him a penny. Over the weekend, Jake was extra attentive, bringing me coffee in bed, suggesting we watch my favorite movies, even cleaning without being asked, all while texting Vicky constantly about their trip, now just 9 days away. Monday morning, I told Jake I had a bank appointment, dressed professionally, and left the apartment while he wished me luck. Where I actually went was to meet Teresa and Vicky at our favorite coffee shop to finalize the details of our endgame. When I got home that evening, Jake was waiting expectantly. I told him the bank needed more time to review my application, but things looked positive. He tried to hide his disappointment, but I could see his hands shaking as he hugged me. 4 days before the trip, Vicky played her MasterCard, called Jake crying, saying her grandmother had been hospitalized and she might need to fly home instead of going to Bora Bora. Jake panicked, offered solutions. Could they postpone? No. Non-refundable. Could her grandmother wait? Vicky was shocked he'd suggest that. What if he came with her to see grandmother? No. Family only. After letting him stew for 24 hours, Vicky called back with good news. Grandmother was stable. The trip could proceed as planned. Jake was so relieved he sent flowers to her grandmother, flowers that were delivered to my new apartment where Vicky was staying half the time as we prepared for the finale. 2 days before the trip, Jake was a complete mess. The loan still hadn't been approved. He was trying to pack while hiding his suitcase whenever I was home, juggling texts between me and Vicky, trying to keep both relationships afloat. It was almost sad how pathetic he'd become. Almost. The night before the big trip, I told Jake I needed space to think about our future and would stay with Teresa for a few days. His relief was visible. This solved his problem of leaving for the airport without me asking questions. What he didn't know was that I'd already moved most of my belongings to my new apartment. All that was left were clothes and toiletries I could fit in one suitcase, which I packed while he showered. As I was leaving, Jake hugged me tight and said he hoped I'd have an answer about our future when he got back from his business trip on Sunday. The fact that he could lie so convincingly after 3 years together still astounded me. The moment I closed the door, our countdown began. Operation Complete Destruction was officially underway. I went straight to Teresa's where Vicky was waiting. We ordered pizza, opened champagne, and went over the plan one final time. Tomorrow morning, Jake would head to the airport thinking he was about to have the romantic getaway of his life. Instead, he was about to have the worst day he could imagine. We barely slept, too wired with anticipation. At 6 a.m., Vicky texted Jake. "Good morning. So excited for today. Can't wait to see you at the airport." Jake responded immediately. "Just finishing packing. See you at Terminal 3 at 8:30. Can't believe we're finally doing this." At 7, we watched through the building security app as Jake left with his suitcase, looking happier than I'd seen him in months. The minute his car pulled away, Teresa, Vicky, and I got in Teresa's car and headed to the airport. Not to fly anywhere, just to witness what was about to unfold. We arrived at Terminal 3 around 8:15 and positioned ourselves at a cafe with a perfect view of the check-in counters. Jake arrived at 8:25, looking around eagerly for Vicky. He checked his phone, texted her, then got in the check-in line. At exactly 8:45, when Jake would be approaching the counter, Vicky sent the message we'd carefully crafted the night before. It was a selfie of the three of us together, all smiling widely with middle fingers up. Beneath it, "Surprise, asshole. Hope you enjoy your $17,000 vacation for one. Your girlfriend knows everything." We watched from our hiding spot as Jake received the message. He froze in the middle of the line, staring at his phone. His face went from confusion to shock to horror in seconds. He looked around wildly, as if expecting to see us. Tried calling Vicky. Straight to voicemail. She'd blocked him. Tried calling me. Same result. Jake stepped out of line, still staring at his phone in disbelief. He slumped onto a nearby bench, frantically typing messages that would never be delivered. We watched for almost 20 minutes before he finally got up and walked zombie-like toward the exit, dragging his suitcase behind him. He spent the entire day calling from different numbers, leaving desperate voicemails. We ignored them all. I left a letter on the kitchen table outlining exactly what we knew, along with printed copies of his worst messages about me, the ones where he called me hideous, unbearable, his Roomba that also pays rent. The letter explained that if he contacted us again with threats or harassment, the entire evidence folder would be sent to his parents, his boss, and posted publicly. Was it all strictly necessary? Probably not. Was it satisfying after months of psychological abuse? Absolutely. That evening, Jake showed up at the apartment to find he couldn't get in. I'd already removed my things, and the building security had been notified. The camera caught his meltdown in the hallway as he realized just how thoroughly he'd been played. Over the next few days, Jake cycled through every emotion. Emails begging for forgiveness, then angry ones calling us names, then pitiful ones about losing his job if he couldn't repay his debts. Exactly 1 week after the airport incident, Vicky, Teresa, and I booked ourselves into a gorgeous local spa resort for the weekend, paid for with the last of our fun money. While soaking in hot tubs and getting massages, we each posted a single photo to social media. Predictably, this triggered another round of desperate messages from Jake, now using his brother's phone. He couldn't understand how we could be so cruel, claimed what he'd done wasn't that bad compared to how we destroyed his life. The lack of self-awareness was truly spectacular. In the months since, Jake has tried various tactics to contact me, even sent a letter to my parents' house, which they forwarded unopened. What he hasn't done is repay any of the money he took from our joint account, or explain to his family and friends why he suddenly had to move back in with his parents at 30. As for the financial aftermath, Jake's apparently working 2 jobs trying to pay off his debts. The vacation packages were all non-refundable. His credit score is destroyed. His savings are gone. Meanwhile, I'm thriving in my new apartment. I've been promoted at work. I'm wearing designer clothes and jewelry that Jake technically paid for. I'm planning a real vacation with Teresa and Vicky next summer, one we'll pay for with our own money, because we're not pathetic cheaters who manipulate people. Last week, Jake showed up at my building at 3 a.m., clearly drunk, crying into my doorbell camera about how he'd made the biggest mistake of his life and would do anything for another chance. I watched the live feed from my phone, cozy in bed, and did the only reasonable thing. Sent the video to Vicky and Teresa so we could all laugh about it, then forwarded it to building security to have him removed. 20 missed calls later, he finally gave up. I slept like a baby that night, knowing he was suffering while I was absolutely thriving. If someone constantly accuses you of doing something you're not doing, pay attention. That's usually their confession, not your crime. And if someone makes you feel crazy for trusting your instincts, that's when you should trust them most. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.